All preparations should be rushed to completion along the Florida West Coast as Idalia takes aim. Good evening, I'm Mike Naso with the YouTube Tropical Update. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe to our page. We have a lot to talk about with Idalia this evening. I'm recording this update at about 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and we have the latest 11 p.m. update from the National Hurricane Center, and it shows the system getting better organized. This is the water vapor image of the Atlantic Basin, and we have two main features. Well, on the left side of your screen, you can see that spin. That's Tropical Storm Irwin way out there in the eastern Pacific. But in the Atlantic, we have Idalia here, and we have Franklin over here. Franklin became a very powerful Category 4 hurricane on Monday, one of the best-looking hurricanes I've seen in quite a long time. The great thing about Franklin is that it's going to remain out at sea, although we do have a tropical storm watch for the island of Bermuda. But Idalia is going to be the main feature that we watch the next 48 hours because it is forecast to strengthen into a major hurricane and make landfall somewhere there in the Big Bend area or the west coast of Florida, and it's going to pack a wallop. Here is the latest as of 10 p.m. Central Time, 11 p.m. Eastern on Idalia. The storm was at 22.0 north, 85.0 west, winds of 70, so it's perched just below hurricane strength, very, very close, and it could become a hurricane at any time overnight or in the morning. Maybe by the time you see this update, it might already be called a hurricane. It's 983 millibar pressure. That is low for a tropical storm. This thing's going to have slightly lower than normal pressure, I think, throughout its lifetime, and that's a sign of an intense storm. Moving north, actually just east of north, at about 8 miles an hour, so it was moving a little faster earlier. It slowed down just east of north, and it should become a hurricane and continue just east of north, and then sometime very early Wednesday morning make landfall there in the Big Bend of Florida. But again, we have hurricane warnings in effect, not only for western Cuba, currently being impacted by Idalia, but we have a hurricane warning from the middle of Longboat Key all the way over to Indian Pass on the Panhandle. Now that includes Tampa Bay, St. Petersburg, Horseshoe Beach, Steinhatchee River, all those areas. So you guys in the Big Bend are really looking like you're going to get the main thrust of this hurricane as it pulls in. But again, hurricane watches further to the south, tropical storm warnings. You're going to have water rises and wet water all along the western coast of Florida, regardless of where the exact center of the storm makes landfall. We'll talk about that. Here's the infrared satellite, and notice it's been waxing and waning and waxing and waning. There is still a little bit of shear here on the northwest side, and that's impacting it, and it still has this flatness right here that is not favorable for development, which is why it hasn't quite become a hurricane just yet as of 11 p.m. Eastern Time. But through time, it's going to be in a much better environment, and these waters are very, very warm. So this bursting pattern here will eventually pop out an eye, and we'll see it strengthen more dramatically probably on Tuesday afternoon and Tuesday night. Unfortunately, that means it might not have a lot of time to spin down before making landfall along the west coast of Florida. And right now, the landfall intensity is expected to be a Category 3. That is a major hurricane. And that would not be good news at all. Obviously, the last major hurricane to hit Florida was in September of 2022. Hurricane Ian was a Category 4 hurricane. And hopefully it doesn't get as strong as Ian and doesn't cause the problems that Ian caused. This is the Cuban radar sped up here. It looks kind of prehistoric, but you can see right in there is the inner core building, and it still has problems, like I said, on its northwest side, and it will eventually mix out a well-defined eye and will start to intensify. But again, a lot of heavy weather there on the right side, which is why we have hurricane warnings for western Cuba. They are being impacted by tropical storm force winds and heavy rains right about now. That wind shear I mentioned is decreasing. The shear tendencies are decreasing, but it is still dealing with it. That might not be a good thing. I remember in 2018, Hurricane Michael, in October of 2018, took so long getting his act together that by the time he bombed out, he was coming ashore in Mexico Beach. So you almost would want it to become a strong hurricane now so that it has time to weaken, rather than take its time and then as soon as it becomes a strong hurricane, it's into land. So We don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to watch it very carefully. The most important aspect with this storm is going to be the water rises. The Chassahowitzka area here, all the way to the Aquila River, very high water rises. That includes Steinhatchee River, the Homosassa Springs, Horseshoe Beach, all of these areas. 8 to 12 feet of storm surge possible, with crashing waves on top of that and devastating 100, 120 mile per hour winds. So very, very bad news if you're in the Big Bend of Florida, especially near and on the right side of where the hurricane comes ashore. So if it does go up towards, say, Cedar Key, down here, Longboat Key, Tampa Bay, the Anclote River, you guys could have water rises 3, 5, 7, 9 feet. That is some serious storm surge. This area here is very susceptible to high storm surge. We saw many, many hurricanes make landfall and cause a high surge along the west coast of Florida. Ian last year was one of those storms. We also have seen storms like Camille and Katrina cause high surge there in Mississippi. This whole area of the Gulf of Mexico, from the Mississippi Delta all the way over to the west coast, is very, very vulnerable to a high storm surge. Again, we'll have water rises of 1 to 2 feet in the Keys as the storm passes by to your west, but be on the lookout, it's going to be rough. The computer models trended west today, not east, and so the Hurricane Center continues to bring it here into the Big Bend, but a lot of the models are even west of that, and I've been skeptical because I've seen so many storms that we say they're going to go this way, and they kind of drag a little more that way to the east. So that's why I'm skeptical, but I'm looking at the models and they seem in rather good agreement at a landfall in the Big Bend, so that's where we got to aim right now. Afterwards, it looks like it's going to kind of dawdle here off the Carolinas and maybe even loop back around. So we're going to watch this because that could prolong any rainfall threat in the southeastern United States. The track did shift ever so slightly east. Watch that line in Florida there, that little line. See how that jumps a little bit at the 11 p.m. update? It's noise and it's still a long way out, but I'm going to watch that line very carefully because wherever that center makes landfall, to the right could have a very, very high storm surge impact. And we're going to watch this very carefully. The key messages as of 10 p.m. Central, 11 p.m. Eastern for Idalia. Number 1. There is a danger of life-threatening storm surge inundation along the Florida Gulf Coast. They have a storm surge warning in effect, and that includes for the Tampa Bay and Big Bend region of Florida. The Big Bend area, like I said, is very, very susceptible. Inundation of 8 to 12 feet above ground level is expected somewhere between the Chassahowitzka River and the Alusila River. Guys, I have trouble with these names. Where did they come up with it? This is Florida. Come on. It's not freaking Czechoslovakia. Residents in these areas should follow any advice given by local officials. Number 2, hurricane warnings are expected within portions of the hurricane warning area along the Florida Gulf Coast, and that's the potential for destructive winds wherever that core moves onshore. So the strong winds will also spread inland across portions of North Florida near the center of Idalia. And number 3, the heavy rainfall is expected. I said western Cuba already getting pounded on that radar with heavy rain. And so that's going to be spreading all the way across the Florida Panhandle, the west coast of Florida, southern Georgia, all the way into areas of the Carolinas by Wednesday and Thursday. So again, a very, very serious threat here that we're going to watch over the next 24 to 36 hours. Hurricane Franklin, boy, did this surprise. Remember when it was a measly tropical storm in the Caribbean? 150 miles an hour. 150 miles per hour. That is a high-end Category 4, almost a Category 5. The pressure had been down into the 920s, and it's at 29.4 north, 71.0 west, moving north at 9, and it should eventually move northeast and get on out of here by the weekend. We won't have to deal with Franklin anymore. Hopefully it'll stay away from the Canadian Maritimes and Bermuda, but just in case, Bermuda, you are under a tropical storm watch because with this wind field, if the hurricane does make a track like that, there is a chance you could get kind of close to the wind field and it could cause some problems. Regardless, you're going to have a lot of rip currents and heavy surf propagating away from the hurricane because it is so strong. Here is a beautiful infrared image. Look at these two storms. On the lower left of the screen, there is Idalia moving right near the western tip of Cuba, and there obviously is the beautiful Hurricane Franklin. Just dynamic outflow in all quadrants. Very, very dangerous, well-defined hurricane. However, obviously moving towards the out to sea track. This one struggling. Not good outflow on the northwest side. Is trying to expand, but it's still dealing with some problems. Although at the end there, it looks like it's finally starting to burst a little bit. So both of these systems are very, very interesting tropical specimens. We have one that's a monster hurricane moving out, and one that's not a monster but is expected to become a strong hurricane and move in. So again, if you are in areas of Apalachicola, St. George Island, Horseshoe Beach, Tampa Bay, the entire Big Bend area, especially right in there, be on the lookout for Tropical Storm Idalia, soon to be a hurricane, forecast to make landfall very early Wednesday morning as a powerful major hurricane. We'll be back with frequent updates as the system continues to organize there near the western tip of Cuba. I'm Mike Naso. Please subscribe, and I'll talk to you next time with more on Idalia.